It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This line from Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince has echoed through centuries, unsettling generations with its cold logic. Yet beneath its brutal pragmatism lies a deep psychological truth about the nature of power and the limitations of empathy. Machiavelli wasn't simply a ruthless strategist, he was a profound observer of the forces that shape human behavior and control. His critique of compassion, or what he might call indulgent mercy, reveals truths that today's culture of uncritical empathy often overlooks. What Machiavelli saw clearly is this: empathy, while noble, is not inherently virtuous when stripped of strategy. It is often a weakness, not a strength, a doorway for manipulation. This was not said from despair, but from sharp analysis of history's repeated lessons. Power is governed by laws as unyielding as gravity. You may wish for justice, but if you ignore these laws, you fall. Empathy, if unchecked, weakens leadership. It clouds judgment. It invites manipulation. The question is not whether Machiavelli was morally correct, but whether he described reality as it truly is. And the facts support him. This idea, the empathy trap, is central to his philosophy. He writes, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of necessity that the deceiver will always find someone to deceive." This is not cynicism, it is clarity. Compassionate people in their emotional consistency become predictable. That predictability becomes a weapon in the hands of those who see clearly and act ruthlessly. Machiavelli described rulers undone not by cruelty, but by their gentleness. They spared when they should have punished, hesitated when decisiveness was needed, and showed mercy where firmness was required. And so they fell. Empathy blinds. First, the empathetic assume others are guided by the same moral compass. Second, this assumption leads to blind spots, where cunning minds manipulate emotions without being noticed. Third, when exploitation becomes obvious, the empathetic often respond with more empathy, not caution, trapping themselves. Machiavelli saw this happen over and over. The compassionate ruler became the vulnerable one. The prince who wished to be loved was abandoned when power faded. Fear, not love, sustains order. That's not because humans are evil, but because we are practical. Even today, psychology supports Machiavelli. Studies show empathetic individuals are more likely to be targeted in negotiations. Their emotions become pressure points, leverage. The most dangerous part is how empathy warps our ability to assess danger. Psychologists call it the identifiable victim effect. Emotional urgency trumps logic. Leaders then focus on immediate comfort rather than long-term stability. In doing so, they trade strength for sentiment and lose both. Machiavelli also understood how empathy erodes moral discipline. The promise given was a necessity of the past, he wrote. The word broken is a necessity of the present. Empathy, unchecked, creates inconsistency. It weakens what modern theorists call credible commitment, the ability to stick to principles even when it's uncomfortable. Leadership requires that. Love and fear cannot fully coexist. If forced to choose, fear creates the stronger foundation. Not because cruelty is desirable, but because structure is necessary. This weakness of empathy plays out in three ways. First, empathetic leaders apply different standards based on feelings, not rules. Second, this inconsistency makes their authority unreliable. Third, that unreliability invites challenge. Machiavelli watched this unfold in real power struggles. Rulers who began with harsh clarity then ruled fairly achieved peace. Those who started with softness but turned harsh, later created chaos. Pain delayed is pain multiplied. Strategic severity now prevents disorder later. Machiavelli wrote, "Men should be either well treated or utterly crushed, because half measures backfire. Minor punishments breed revenge. Empathy leads to softness, and softness creates resistance." Today's leadership experts agree. Consistency, not niceness, builds lasting respect. Predictable firmness offers security. Erratic mercy invites testing. And once people realize mercy can be extracted, they start demanding it, again and again. This is the ratchet effect. Each concession becomes the new normal. Expectations grow, and the leader, trapped by their past empathy, must either surrender more or risk backlash. Machiavelli saw this destroy rulers. He warned, compassion becomes a currency, and others will spend it. First comes the plea for help, then come more demands. And soon, compassion becomes duty, expected, not appreciated. But Machiavelli never said compassion was worthless. He argued it must be tethered to reason. Compassion used without thought is self-destruction. "A man who wishes to be good all the time," he wrote, "will come to ruin among so many who are not good." Mercy invites betrayal. Forgiveness invites greater offenses. Love, unlike fear, is fragile. It fades when power disappears. People act according to their needs, not their gratitude. This harsh truth is echoed by modern research. When consequences vanish, behavior shifts. Moral licensing, the idea that good deeds excuse bad ones, plays into this dynamic. When a leader is generous, followers feel entitled. They mentally spend that generosity. Machiavelli saw this pattern poison entire states. Rulers obsessed with popularity lost the ability to rule. Wanting to be seen as kind, they hesitated to act. But delay breeds decay. The desire to be admired eventually destroys the strength that earns admiration. The necessity of avoiding the reputation of being mean, Machiavelli wrote, often causes liberality to result in harm. Kindness, if too visible, becomes weakness. It raises hopes that cannot be fulfilled. And when the leader finally says no, resentment replaces gratitude. Strategic compassion, therefore, becomes the wiser path. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in rejecting empathy. It was in placing it properly, within a system. It is necessary for a prince to be both a lion and a fox, he said. Empathy must be balanced by cunning and force. The alternative to blind compassion is not cruelty, it is control. Strategic compassion uses empathy as data, not direction. It feels, but it does not follow. The wise leader uses empathy to understand people, not to surrender to them. Systems are built where incentives match ethics. When those systems are violated, consequences follow, without apology. Machiavelli praised rulers who punished once, clearly, and then ruled fairly. This, he believed, saved lives. Clarity prevents chaos. Mercy used selectively and firmly avoids more suffering than constant indulgence. Modern psychology agrees. Organizations thrive under leaders who are consistent. The short-term sting of punishment leads to long-term calm. People need boundaries. They respect structure. Compassion, when unrestrained, destroys both. But when guided by discipline, it strengthens them. This is the virtue Machiavelli admired, not moral purity, but psychological strength. True leadership is not ruled by empathy, but informed by it. Compassion is a tool, not a compass. And unless it is kept in check, it becomes the very thing that power cannot afford: a vulnerability. A leader is not cruel without reason, but responds with precision to produce maximum psychological effect with minimal actual harm. People judge more by appearances than by actions, because everyone sees but few understand. That's why symbolic acts of strength or mercy often influence more than their repeated practice. A leader capable of cruelty who shows restraint gains more respect than one who is always gentle or always severe. Machiavelli illustrated this with Cesare Borgia's rule in Romagna. He hired a brutal governor to impose order, let him absorb the blame, and then executed him publicly for excessive cruelty. This strategy shaped public perception while actually creating a more humane regime. In such leadership, empathy is not the main guide, but a means of calibration. It does not ask, "What would kindness do?" but what action minimizes long-term pain? These calculated decisions often differ from instinctual empathetic reactions. The first test of a ruler's intellect lies in the quality of his advisors. This reflects how controlled empathy shapes systems that harness human nature rather than deny it. A wise leader doesn't demand perfect virtue, but builds incentives, so virtue becomes the most profitable choice. Behavioral economics affirms this Machiavellian logic. Systems aligning personal gain with public benefit outperform those built solely on emotional appeal. Though seemingly cold, strategic systems generate more consistent compassion than blind empathy. This disciplined form of empathy has three key dimensions. First, it distinguishes between those needing full compassion and those needing management. Second, it accepts short-term severity to prevent future harm. Third, it ensures predictability, offering psychological stability. This remains relevant today. Whoever wants to foresee the future must look to the past. Human nature hasn't changed, even if the context has. In the workplace, excessive empathy often results in the nice guy finishes last scenario. Those who lead with emotions over strategy are more likely to be taken advantage of in negotiations, promotions, and resource allocation. Their emotional predictability becomes a weakness, not a virtue. In global politics, Machiavelli's warning rings true. Empathy without credible power rarely achieves intended results. Nations signaling unconditional kindness often create moral hazard, inviting reckless behavior from adversaries confident of low risk. In relationships, too much empathy creates emotional imbalance, where one person always gives while receiving little in return. As Machiavelli said, a man trying to be good in all ways will fail among others who are not. Without structures that protect compassionate actors, pure empathy becomes evolutionarily disadvantageous. This truth is clearest online, where social safeguards are weakest. In digital spaces, where physical presence and communal responsibility vanish, Machiavelli's fears play out most clearly. Those showing empathy without boundaries get exploited with minimal consequence to the exploiters. Online negotiations confirm this. Distant interactions intensify the power imbalance Machiavelli observed in Renaissance politics. Emotion without defense becomes a resource ripe for extraction. People mostly judge by what they see, not what they understand. This is why modern media, favoring emotional imagery over depth, becomes a breeding ground for empathy abuse, just as Machiavelli warned. The path forward is not rejecting empathy, but refining it. Machiavelli doesn't demand we discard compassion, only that we apply it wisely. Strategic empathy means showing care with awareness of power and context, not from wishful thinking. Empathy becomes a skill to manage, not a reflex to obey. It asks, what does this feeling reveal? Not what should I do because of it? This protects empathy's insight while avoiding its dangers. For modern use, Machiavelli suggests 3 practices. First, link empathy with firm boundaries. Second, make exceptions rare and unpredictable. Third, build systems where acting morally benefits everyone. The crowd is swayed by appearances, and most of the world is the crowd. So, strategic empathy must shape perceptions, not just hold good intentions. Appear compassionate and strong, even when one must choose. Research confirms Machiavelli. Leaders who blend care with clarity earn more respect and loyalty than those who lean fully into kindness or force. These seemingly opposing traits, empathy and control, when integrated, lead to leadership that is more stable and effective than either alone. Machiavelli called this necessità, the harsh truths of reality. A leader must adapt principles to real-world limits while preserving their deeper goals. Strategic empathy is bounded compassion, empathy with structure. It allows real connection without the traps of naive kindness. This dual approach thrives even in competitive or hostile spaces. As Machiavelli said, there is nothing harder or more dangerous than starting a new order of things. In a world that idolizes blind compassion, the challenge is building an empathy that works. That means understanding empathy's actual function, not idealized myths. True compassion lies in results, not just intentions. Strategy turns empathy into a system, not a risk. Machiavelli's realism is not pessimism, it's a roadmap. All people carry within them the capacity for vice. This is not a cynical view, but a realistic one, grounded in the repeated lessons of human behavior across history. Empathy, when extended without structure, becomes vulnerable, too easily manipulated, too quickly exhausted. To truly work, empathy must be embedded within systems that guide people toward virtue. Without such frameworks, empathy is unsustainable. It withers under the weight of its own good intentions, unable to withstand the pressures of self-interest, manipulation, and unpredictability. This leads us to 3 governing principles that ensure the survival of compassion in a world that often rewards cunning over kindness. First, empathy must be paired with incentives that encourage good behavior. This means designing environments, whether in governments, businesses, families, or friendships, where acting ethically aligns with personal benefit. When people recognize that cooperation, integrity, and fairness are in their best interest, these values cease to be noble sacrifices and instead become rational choices. The ideal system does not depend on everyone being good, but rather ensures that good behavior is the most logical path forward. Second, compassionate exceptions should remain unpredictable. If people begin to expect mercy, they will exploit it. If leniency becomes routine, it invites manipulation. Just as a ruler cannot always forgive without diminishing authority, a leader or system must avoid setting patterns of predictable forgiveness. Inconsistency in exceptions preserves the power of empathy as a strategic force, rather than reducing it to a loophole to be gamed. It allows compassion to retain its moral gravity, rare, significant, and memorable. Third, virtue must become the winning strategy, not merely a moral appeal but a structural advantage. The call to be good cannot rest on emotional pressure alone. It must be embedded in the rules of the game. Systems should reward virtue in tangible ways, through opportunity, stability, reputation, and protection. When virtue becomes more profitable than vice, even the self-interested will gravitate toward it. This is not idealism, it is sophisticated. Realism, Machiavelli's warning, is timeless. A ruler who relies only on promises, without securing power through practical mechanisms, is doomed to fall. The same truth applies to those who rely solely on kindness, trusting that goodwill will be enough to protect them. History shows us otherwise. Kindness without defense becomes prey. Generosity without discernment invites betrayal. True compassion, then, must be fortified. It must be guarded by boundaries, informed by strategy, and protected by systems. Modern organizational psychology affirms this view. Research consistently shows that systems aligning individual incentives with collective welfare produce far more consistent ethical behavior than moral preaching alone. A team functions best not because each member is a saint, but because the structure makes cooperation more rewarding than competition. Laws, rewards, and checks and balances create an environment where empathy becomes sustainable, not because people are perfect, but because the system channels imperfect motives toward productive ends. This may sound cold, like compassion filtered through a spreadsheet, but it is this very logic that enables empathy to endure. Emotional spontaneity may create moments of warmth, but only systems thinking ensures that warmth doesn't get extinguished in the long term. Systems, precise, impersonal, and often unfeeling, create a reliability that pure emotion cannot. They protect empathy from being overextended, from being exploited, and from collapsing under the pressure of expectation. Thus, the real question is not whether we should choose empathy or Machiavelli, but how we can integrate the two. This fusion, call it virtuous effectiveness, is the ability to care deeply while thinking clearly. It is compassion that operates with an understanding of human nature. It is kindness, not as an impulse, but as a discipline. This approach does not dilute empathy. On the contrary, it strengthens it. It gives empathy armor. It makes compassion strategic, scalable, and sustainable. Machiavelli famously wrote, "Good laws need good arms." He meant that no policy, however just, can survive without the force to uphold it. Applied metaphorically, the same truth holds for compassion. Empathy without strength becomes a victim. Real care cannot be passive. It must be willing to defend itself. It must have the power to enforce boundaries, resist exploitation, and maintain order. Only then can it truly reduce suffering. And that's the goal, isn't it? Not just to feel compassion, but to reduce suffering. That reduction must be sustainable. It must outlast a single moment, a single emotion, a single act. To achieve that, we must move from sentiment to structure, from temporary feeling to long-term design. Systems built with both heart and mind can do what raw emotion cannot: endure, transform, shape the world. Machiavelli's most enduring lesson is that effectiveness matters more than intent. Appearances shape perception, and perception governs influence. People do not judge us by our motives, but by our actions and their results. A leader may be filled with compassion, but if their choices lead to disorder, pain, or instability, their intentions are irrelevant. What matters is not what we feel, but what we build. What structures we leave behind, what behaviors we enable, what suffering we truly lessen. The world does not reward the most empathetic heart. It rewards the most effective system. True empathy, then, is not in indulgence, but in design. It is not in every tear we shed, but in every structure we create that makes those tears less frequent. The highest form of compassion is not emotional availability, but moral architecture. Not mercy in every moment, but a world in which mercy is less frequently required. This is the paradox Machiavelli reveals. The most reliable compassion often comes from the coldest logic. The leaders who best protect the vulnerable are not those who feel the most, but those who understand the most about incentives, power, and human nature. And when that understanding is paired with genuine care, we arrive at something rare and transformative. Not less empathy, but smarter empathy. Not weaker, but wiser. Not softer, but stronger. The future doesn't need less emotion. It needs guided emotion. Strengthened by structure, refined by insight, protected by systems. This is the empathy that lasts. The empathy that survives challenge. The empathy that endures in history. Not just in sentiment. And so, the ultimate lesson from Machiavelli is not to abandon compassion, but to elevate it, to turn it from a feeling into a force, to make it not just a virtue, but a strategy. Because in a world where everyone sees what you appear to be, but few know what you truly are, appearances, systems, and outcomes matter more than raw intention. True empathy, then, is not a momentary choice. It is a designed reality. One not governed by fleeting emotions, but by thoughtful, resilient, and strategic care.